The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you. This morning I have put you on gallery view so I can actually see those of you out there. And I think it might be a nicer way to talk, to actually see you. And today is the third talk, and I am going to be talking about what is compassion. And I have to say that I really don't know what compassion is. I have my own ideas and the readings that I've done, and I have what seems to be how I see compassion working for me. I found a definition of compassion in the Book of Joy, and this is what it says. Compassion is a sense of concern that arises when we are confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to see that suffering relieved. Compassion is what connects the feelings of empathy to acts of kindness, generosity, and other expressions of altruistic tendencies. I used to think that there were people in this world who were compassionate and people in this world who were not compassionate. And guess what I thought I was? I thought I was not compassionate. And I thought that people were just born this way, either compassionate or not compassionate. But since I began meditating and training, I realized that it's not about that at all, that there is, at the heart of all existence is compassion. So we all have selfless compassion within ourselves. And it, for me, it's not always there. I don't always feel compassionate. And sometimes I have no idea when it's going to arise for me and when it isn't. Sometimes I'll be reading a transfer of merit notice or talking to someone or hearing about a situation, and compassion will just naturally arise. And sometimes there might be some horrifying thing that's going on and no compassion arises. That's just the way it is. And that's just the way it is. And I think probably that's the way it is for other people as well. I remember compassion can arise when we're not so completely focused on ourselves. And one time when we were having a retreat, I was having a difficult time, and I went outside to our stupa to ask for help for myself. And I saw someone else out there who looked like they were having a more difficult time than I was. And immediately my response was, please help so-and-so. And in doing that, I actually felt peaceful, but it was just spontaneous. So for me, I never know when compassion is going to arise or not. And I've just learned to accept that that's the way it is. For me, at least at this point in time. When I was at Compassionate Friend Hermitage preparing these talks, I was getting mice in the house. And one time I opened the little mouse, have a heart mouse trap. And I saw this poor little scared mouse in there, and my heart went out to it. And and then I wanted to act compassionately. I wanted to make sure I took it away and blessed it in a timely way so it didn't sit in that little cage scared out of its mind. But another time I might open the cage and see a mouse and not feel anything. So who knows? Once when I was concerned, as you can see, this was a concern of mine, that I wasn't feeling compassionate when I thought I should be, which is not being very compassionate to myself, because, you know, disliking yourself because you're not feeling very compassionate is not a very compassionate thing to do. Here's when I was, again, I was feeling, gee, I really should be feeling compassionate and I'm not. I went into someone's room to do something for them, and I saw this verse on their wall, which was helpful for me at the time. It said, "In difficult moments with others, let us remember this truth. It is better to find ourselves lacking the love we need to be kind and to quietly suffer this humiliation than it is to act from what is unkind by lashing out to blame another as a way of hiding our weakness." Now, at that time, that was very comforting to me because it made me feel like I am not alone in this feeling. But in preparing these talks on compassion, I thought, gee, that sounds a bit harsh. So I wasn't even sure I was going to read it this morning, but I thought, well, it helped me at the time. It helped me to connect with other people who might be feeling the same way that I was feeling. And that actually is an opening up to compassion. And it's not really about how we feel, because that's being too focused on the self. I want to feel compassion. You know, I want to be a compassionate person. It's more about, and that's good, but not really worrying too much about how we're feeling, but more just being kind. And we can do this. And I think that's why that verse cheered me up, because it was, I don't have to feel compassionate, I can still be kind. That's something that we all can do. And one time one thing that I put above my computer in my office is in red letters, kindness above all, because that's what came up during one of the retreats I was doing. Anyway. It is important to act from kindness, and it is actually very helpful to our training, because we are then acting from our true nature and not letting what might obscure this kindness affect us. Another way of looking at compassion I found in an article on the practice of the Brahma Viharas, which I'm going to read you one of the sections of this, I think tomorrow. The Brahma Viharas are kindness, compassion, gladness at another's good fortune or well-being, and evenness or equanimity. These are states that transcend the boundaries of our normal mindset. And what he says at the end, this is by Ajahn Susito, and what he says at the end of this section on what the Brahma Viharas are is this: we need to make the distinction between the actual experience of these states and our ideas about them. Many people enjoy ideals, and one can get tremendously idealistic about levels of compassion, loving this and loving that. but in reality, it's not like that. The Brahma Viharas are not about powerful emotional states, having a mind filled with eye-watering compassion every moment of the day. A heart trembling at the sight of any creature experiencing the mildest degree of discomfort. Nor are they about being excruciatingly sensitive to everything on the planet. We think, well, that's being really compassionate. However, what he says is, but it would be extraordinarily painful to live like that. Can you imagine? Not very compassionate towards ourselves. So that's one way of looking at compassion. Now, in my description of what this retreat was going to be about, one of the things I said was that you can't have wisdom without compassion, and you have to have wisdom. Let's see, let me see if I can get this right. There's no wisdom without compassion, and you need wisdom to act compassionately. So you need them both. And I'm going to be talking about this a bit. There's a nice little, very simple description of what goes wrong if you have compassion without wisdom. These are some very simple examples that are in this book that I told you about, Step by Step, by Mahagosananda. And in it, it says, balancing wisdom and compassion. Wisdom must always be balanced by compassion, and compassion must be balanced by wisdom. We cannot have peace without this balance. I would like to share 3 stories to illustrate this. One day, a violent dragon king met a bodhisattva on the path. The bodhisattva said, "My son, do not kill. If you keep the 5 precepts and care for all life, you will be happy." Hearing just these few words, the dragon became totally nonviolent. The children who tended animals at the foot of the Himalayan mountains had been very afraid of the dragon. But when the dragon became gentle, they lost their fear and soon began to jump on him, pull his tail, and stuff stones and dirt into his mouth. After a while, the dragon could not eat and he became very sick. The next time the Dragon King met the Bodhisattva, he shouted, "You told me that if I kept the precepts and was compassionate, I would be happy. But now I suffer, and I am not happy at all." The Bodhisattva replied, "My son, if you have compassion, morality, and virtue, you must also have wisdom and intelligence. This is the way to protect yourself. The next time the children make you suffer, show them your fire. After that, they will trouble you no more." Who was harmed when the dragon lacked wisdom? Both the dragon and the children suffered because they were causing harm. The balance of wisdom and compassion is called the middle path. Here is another story. Once an old farmer found a dying cobra in his rice field. Seeing the cobra suffering, the farmer was filled with compassion. He picked up the snake and carried him home. Then he fed the cobra warm milk, wrapped him in a soft blanket, and lovingly placed the snake beside him in his bed as he went to sleep. In the morning, the farmer was dead. Why was he killed? Because he used only compassion and not wisdom. If you pick up a cobra, it will bite you. When you find a way to save the dying cobra without lifting it, you have balanced wisdom and compassion. Then you are happy, and the cobra is happy too. Here is the 3rd story. There was a farmer who went into the forest with his friend to gather wood. When the farmer struck a tree with his axe, he disturbed a beehive. and a swarm of angry bees flew out and began stinging him. The farmer's friend was filled with compassion. He grabbed his axe and killed the bees with swift, mighty blows. Unfortunately, he also killed the farmer. Compassion without wisdom can cause great suffering. We might even say, it is better to have a wise enemy than a foolish friend. Wisdom and compassion must walk together. Having one without the other is like walking with one foot. You may hop a few times, but eventually you will fall. Balancing wisdom with compassion, you will walk very well, slowly and elegantly, step by step. So you need to trust in a sense of what is good to do and not in your idea of what compassion is. Sometimes it is good to say no, to be firm, to not indulge the other person. And this can be something very hard for people because they want to be compassionate, they want to appear to be compassionate. And yet sometimes the being firm is what true compassion is. When I was a newer monk in my training, I had, and I give myself as an example because I know myself very well, and also to show you that training does work and that we do change. But in my early days, I wanted reassurance constantly. Anything would happen, and I'd go to this one monk asking her for reassurance. One time, she was tired and she was fed up with me. And she said, "You have what you need within. Look within yourself." And although she was kind of annoyed and grumpy, it was exactly what I needed. And I said, "Oh, I no longer have this other person to turn to. I have to look within myself." And I did. And guess what? I found what I needed right there within myself. So being firm at that point was exactly what I needed. I would like to read something else from Buddha Recognizes Buddha by Reverend Master Daishin Morgan, in which he talks about how you need wisdom and compassion together. Now this is on a little bit of a deeper level than step by step, but I hope that you will see what he is trying to say. This is on his chapter on the Bodhisattva of Compassion, in which he's talking about the scripture of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. To calls from every quarter he responds means that Kanzeon does not pick and choose which call he will answer. On the human level, compassion is to do the work that comes to us, rather than worrying about what we want or don't want. We have to see what that work is, since we cannot answer every call. I think that's very important. This involves taking account of the person that we are. I would be a disaster as a comedian, but I can make a reasonably good monk and one who is very glad there are comedians in this world. It is a matter of making the offering that is ours to give. If we try to respond to every call, then we shall become incapable of any useful action. So that's combining wisdom and compassion, and also seeing what we are able to do, because we are not that other person who perhaps can do things that we wish we could do, but we can only do what we can do. There seems to be an openness to the nature of our offering, an ability to recognize that it is always changing. As long as we don't make our desires more important, The offering and its making are one. So we need to listen, we need to respond, and get the self out of the way. Do what needs to be done. Compassion is based on reality and is not just a matter of warm feelings. Reality is in constant movement, and this movement is compassion itself. This is sometimes hard to see. Nevertheless, reality itself is compassion. If one is held up in the street for one's wallet, threatened with violence, or even beaten up, when we look at the situation with the eye of meditation, it comes down to the concrete reality of what is actually happening. Within the moment, whatever the moment brings, there is a deep sufficiency. One's body may be destroyed, yet one's heart is safe. No matter what happens, compassion is always present. And this brought to mind something that happened to me when I was having surgery in 1982, and I was terribly afraid because I never had had surgery before, where you go under a general anesthetic. And I kept asking for help with this. And just as I was being wheeled down to surgery, what came up for me was surrender. And at that moment, I was able to let go and surrender to the unborn. And then it did not matter what happened to me. I know that I was okay with whatever happened. And so this is what he says. One's body may be destroyed, yet one's heart is safe. No matter what happens, compassion is always present. That presence is not in addition to the unfolding situation, because if it were, then reality would be fundamentally split into the divine and the mundane, the good and the bad, compassion and non-compassion. In the moment of being attacked, the whole reality is that attack. Help is at hand in the form of Kanzeon, which is another name for existence, known as it is in the mind of Zazen. In our acceptance of the situation, we can know we are protected and that no matter what happens, evil will not prevail. At this depth of practice, compassion is simply existence. One accepts the presence of what is, however unpleasant or dreadful. Through such acceptance, one can see what to do, whether to fight, to run, or just to endure according to what the situation gives rise to. As existence, compassion is not a quality that comes and goes, although in confusion, it may seem to us that we have lost touch with it. Nor is it a divine gift that is given in one place and withheld in another. Compassion embraces how we are. Looking at ourselves, we may worry about not being wise, compassionate, or strong enough. But real compassion is to accept our actual nature, as compassion is never unrealistic. I love that. That is so helpful. When we are prepared to accept ourselves as we are, the situation will show us what is needed, and that will include our strengths and our weaknesses. We must act appropriately as ourselves, rooted in the reality of the moment. There is always a way of acting compassionately that is realistic. It will require our deep willingness and trust. We are often blinded to the compassionate nature of existence due to distortions that come from our desire, fear, or anger, which give us a diluted view of the world. The one thing that obscures compassion is ignorance. If we open our eyes, and allow ourselves to see the real nature of our delusions, then these delusions themselves will show us what is needed. Given our commitment to seek the truth, even our delusions become compassionate pointers to right action. I find this very helpful because it sounds like what comes up as good to do may not be easy, but it is something that we, as we are, can handle. So we need to trust that. This also means that we need to get the self out of the way so we can know what is truly good to do. Getting the self out of the way and responding to what is good to do brings us peace and joy. And the joy and the peace that we find is what we truly long for. So in some ways, the suffering in this life can lead us to something deeper, and we can actually be grateful for that in the end. Our practice helps us to become the best person that we can be, and we can't be other than who we are. I was reading this book, I think it's called Living on the Edge, something like that, about this person who does all these good things for people. And I thought, gee, that sounds really good. And then I realized, no, that's not my calling. This is what is good for me to be doing. Rev. Master Koten wrote an article in 1989 that appeared in our journal, and I'd like to read it to you because it kind of exemplifies what Rev. Master Daishin is talking about, and I think you'll see the connection. It's called A Story of Faith. During the last World War, a Chinese woman decided to make a pilgrimage to Putoshan, the most important shrine to Kuan Yin, or Avalokiteshvara, in the whole of China. Her mother had been greatly devoted to Kuan Yin, and she learned from early childhood to call upon the great compassionate ones in time of trouble. Now she was going to make the journey of her life to the very house of the Holy One. So leaving her husband and children at home, and in the company of several other pious women, she set out for Putoshan. Along the way, the women would stop at each temple to pay their respects and to pray for a good and fruitful journey. Upon arrival at Putoshan, the women separated to make their private devotions at the various temples. This woman went to a small side shrine to pray undisturbed. She lit incense and began her devotions. Suddenly there was noise in the outer court, and a group of Japanese soldiers stumbled into the room. They were drunk. They came towards her. With a cry to Kuan Yin for aid, she tried to run, but was unsuccessful. The soldiers raped her and then left. She picked herself up slowly, and when she was able, went out to find the other women. She did not tell anyone of what had happened and returned home. She died many years later. Her last thoughts of what had happened in that temple. All the while it was going on, she saw the face of the Kuan Yin statue looking down. The scripture was wrong. Kuan Yin did not come to save her. She had believed, yet in that moment there was no great holy power. Only her, the soldiers, and the pain. She died in doubt and confusion, leaving an impurity that was passed down to this collection of karma I call me. And in the process of converting this karma, my understanding of faith has changed. This woman did not see that her prayer to Kuan Yin was indeed answered, but not in the way she expected. She did not know that what happened to her was the result of past karma. She could have accepted it on that basis, but she did not. Sometimes infinite compassion means allowing karma to work itself out. Sometimes we need to know what pain is like before we stop inflicting it on others. It is not the fault or the problem of infinite compassion that beings do not learn but become angry or go into despair. At all time, Kuan Yin tells us to look up, as the statue did to that woman. Indeed, that is one of the purposes of the Kuan Yin statue, to tell us to look up. I am sick. Look up. I am alone. Look up. I am weary of life. Look up. I am in great pain. Look up, look up. The beginning of the religious life for me was the belief that there must be something, and the refusal to believe that there was nothing, no meaning to life. Looking up is as this: there is an unborn, uncreated, unformed, undying, indestructible, but I would never have known it if I had not looked up. Looking up has for me also meant forgetting my judgment of myself when I do so. Looking up must be pure. We must never be so ashamed that we do not raise our eyes, for no matter what we have done or what has been done to us, that kessa of gold brocade embraces us all in its exquisite folds, and nothing is outside of it. Therefore, lift up your heads, O ye gates, even lift them up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. And these verses are from the King James Version of the Old Testament of the Bible in the book of Psalms. So we allow ourselves to know compassion by accepting life as it unfolds, and ourselves as we are, by not judging ourselves or others, by not feeding the judgmental thoughts, just letting them arise and pass, by being mindful in daily life so that we can see our karmic tendencies and not act from them. We will sometimes make mistakes, go through rough times, and we can just keep on persevering no matter what. And I have found after my many years of training that we just need to keep persevering, and that we're always given the help that we need if we're willing to see that. If you are in a difficult situation or going through a rough time, see if you can accept it completely, look up, and see compassion within it. The Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu in the Book of Joy talk about how helpful it is to think of others who may be suffering in a similar way. This can help you to see your interconnectedness and not focus so much on, quote, my suffering. And this is what they say. Think about where you are suffering in your life, and then think about all the other people who are going through a similar situation. This perhaps is quite literally the birth of compassion, which means suffering with. The incredible thing, the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop pointed out, was that this suffering with others reminds us that we are not alone. and actually lessens our own pain. This recognition of our interdependence begins to soften our rigid sense of self, the boundaries that separate us from others. Sometimes when we are suffering and we see the suffering of others, of another, we forget our own pain and help that other person. And I found a really good example of this in the Book of Joy. And this is about someone who was sent to death row and lived there for 30 years, and he had not committed the crime that he was sent there for. And this is what it says. When Anthony Ray Hinton went to death row after a trial that can only be called a travesty of justice, he was understandably angry and heartbroken at how the American justice system had failed him. When no one believes a word you say, eventually you stop saying anything. I did not say good morning. I did not say good evening. I did not say a how do you do to anyone. If the guard needed some information from me, I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I was angry. But going into the 4th year, I heard a man in the cell next to mine crying. The love and compassion I had received from my mother spoke through me and asked him what was wrong. He said he had just found out that his mother had passed away. I told him, look at it this way. Now you have someone in heaven who's going to argue your case before God. I thought that was a joke, but then he said, then I told him a joke, and he laughed. Suddenly my voice and my sense of humor were back. For 26 long years after that night, I tried to focus on other people's problems, and every day I did, I would get to the end of the day and realize that I had not focused on my own. Hinton was able to bring love and compassion to a loveless place, and in doing so, he was able to hold on to his joy in one of the most joyless places on the planet. While he was in prison, he watched 54 people, 53 men and one woman, walk by his cell on their way to the execution chamber. He got his fellow inmates to start banging their bars at 5 minutes before the execution. I discovered on death row that the other inmates had not had the unconditional love that I had had from my mother. We became a family, and we did not know if they had any other family or friends there. So we were banging the bars to say to those who were being put to death, we're with you. We still love you right up to the end. I find that to be a very moving story. And what this shows to me is our innate goodness, and that we all have a compassionate heart, even in the most difficult of situations. And this is what the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu talk about quite frequently in this Book of Joy, that we all at heart have compassion within ourselves, and the amazing things that people do when they're moved to compassion.